We've got a very special episode of Dynamically Speaking where we will be joined by Gerry Gebel and Eve Mailer to talk all things authorization, Identiverse, and what's ahead in the next year. So grab your favorite beverage, sit down, and join us. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dynamically Speaking. This is a special episode, truly. We are here at Identiverse 2024, and we have some guests today. So with me, as always, my partner in podcast crime, as it were, our CTO, David Brossard. Hey, David, how's it going?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I am hanging in there, for sure. We also have Gerry Gebel. Gerry, do you want to give a couple of words and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Gerry Gebel here. Great to be back on a podcast with David. We've done so many of these in the past.
Yep.
But these days I'm with Strata Identity as VP of Product and Standards. So great to be here at Identiverse with you all.
Thanks, Gerry. We also have Eve Mailer with us. Eve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. Eve Mailer, and I am the founder of consultancy Venn Factory, and we specialize in helping you develop irresistible identity strategies.
Amazing. So thank you both for taking the time to join our humble little podcast this week. It's a crazy busy week at Identiverse. This is the biggest Identiverse they've had yet. Lots of new folks to the show. And you really got a sense, I think, of that extra energy for a panel that happened on Tuesday that talked about authorization and the future of authorization. And David, you sat on the panel. Gerry, I think I was sitting 2 rows in front of you, maybe in the audience, and Eve, you were the moderator. So during that panel, one of the last questions that actually could have stirred up a debate that would have lasted probably another hour was around when we'll see the tipping point for authorization. Would it be, I think the bright line mark we talked about was, would it be before or after or at 2034? So I wanted to ask you folks, we've had a chance to kind of process that and think on it a little bit. When will it be? Is 2034 the year? Is 2024 the year? What say you?
Well, I'm going to just put in a bid for the multiverse problem here. Imagine Dr. Strange trying to go through all the possibilities. And I think the dependencies have to do with the problems that we're able to solve in the sort of modern cloud containerization era. Mm-hmm. And, at the AuthZen table, we're attempting to, grasp the first few of those challenges and solve them. And it really depends on, finding the next batch that are the next most valuable. But if I'm going to pick a year, I'm going to say within about 5 years. So that's carry the 2029. There's my bid.
I like it.
Yeah, I would say there's a technical track, a technology track, if you will, and a business track. And the real key factor here is, can we combine those two and find the business value that makes the most sense for the technology platform or technologies that exist, and take that forward in that approach. If we do just the technology side of it, it's going to take us longer to get to that tipping point. But if we really join forces and illustrate and highlight the business value, then I think that's what's really going to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think we have to take inspiration from OAuth and how a set of technical standards actually led to business value, because you end up doing better user management, you end up having less fraud, you end up having fewer password resets and all those things. So when an OAuth company comes along and creates a product, maybe as SaaS, they are successful because there's clear value add. So for us at authorization, it's marrying the developer side of, sure, I can use the library for authorization, but also the business side, I can express my policies and audit them and do other things that I think we need to figure out. If we get those two together, then we could have the OAuth moment of authorization. And I'll say 2029. I like the number.
Okay, great. Is it prime? Is it a prime?
You know what?
29 is a prime number.
Yeah.
I like that. I don't know about 2020.
So you mentioned AuthZen. So we had great news this week that a number of authorization companies successfully achieved the interop. There's been a lot of discussion there and some sessions here about that. How does AuthZen change that tipping point line? How big of a step is this? Trying to just quantify this for everybody here is very close to it. So we all understand that this is a big deal. For those who haven't been following the auth-send journey, which I think you could say probably started in earnest or really got going in earnest at last year's Identiverse, how has that changed the future of authorization?
Well, it definitely sort of collapsed down some of the multiverse options, right? Because I think standardization has proven over and over again to be especially valuable in identity and access. David is holding up an electrical plug to make the point, and it's a really weird one. I don't know what
exactly. I don't know. It's Swiss or it's three-pronged. It looks European. It's not European. It's got to be Swiss.
We don't even know, and that is the challenge, of course, when it comes to sewing together disparate systems. And I think that auth-send, like the meditative practice, is seeking to pick away at these problems that suffer from not things that aren't value add when it comes to sewing those systems together, when it comes to integrating systems. And so now that a lot of more people have PDP and PEP on, sort of the tip of their tongue, thanks to zero trust architecture talk, I think that there's sort of a new opportunity for standardizing some of those interactions and even going beyond. David, you mentioned OAuth, and I think it's a great exemplar of what we could strive to be. And I think we need to strive to integrate with and learn from, the success of OAuth.
I think the timing is right as well, because when I look around, there is so much investment in authorization today. You look at the number of vendors involved, large and small, the number of open source projects that are out there. It's really incredible the amount of investment and innovation that's happening. So I think the timing is also right to align some of those forces where appropriate. Yes, there's going to be lots of different seeds planted and different approaches because there's a lot of different technology and business problems out there to solve. But if we can align some of these efforts and create some standardization where possible, and therefore interoperability where possible, I think I'm also confident, or I'm really pleased about the timing of auth-send and its inception and where the market is right now.
And to quantify what you're saying, Gerry, we had 12 vendors, I think total of 14 implementations at the Interop on Tuesday. So that's great. And of those 12 vendors / 14 implementations, the bulk of them were policy-based. So we're talking things like Open Policy Agent and Rego. We're talking things like JSON format of policies, YAML, of course, Alpha. So there are all these, but also the graph-based products, right? That were there. And what's really cool with auth-send is that it makes it all plug and play. So if you want to swap out policy for graph, you can do that, and the consuming application doesn't need to know that you swapped it out. So that's really compelling.
I was really impressed actually by the swiftness with which everybody put together these implementations. And I think for starters, you're going to see sort of shims on existing, and that's perfectly fine and could be acceptable for a really long time. Back in the, I want to date myself here, back in the day when we were working on XML, we had an informal design principle of trying to make it so that a desperate Perl hacker, that was sort of the standard of the day for dev attractiveness, a DPH, a desperate Perl hacker, would need only a week to write a conforming XML parser. And I think we've proven how fast it's possible to just try out this, new draft protocol. So it's something maybe others out there listening may want to try.
Exactly. And it is impressive that speed when you're talking really a year and all of the pieces that went into that for us to be where we are now. Gerry, after the panel, when we were chatting, you spoke a bit about, and this stayed with me, so I had it on my list of things to ask you, just how aligned the future of application development as a whole is with the future of the authorization market. So my question would be, how linked are they? And do you see that they will continue to be very linked, or will there be a divergence of any sort in your mind?
Well, I think they have to be linked, right? If you think about the technology transitions that have occurred, since XACML first came out in 2001, whatever it was, right?
Yep.
Where XML and SOAP were the, lingua franca of the day.
WS Federation.
Right. WS Star and all of this. Mm-hmm. And then, we moved to JSON and HTTPS and REST. And lighter weight protocols, APIs, now microservices, now cloud native. So my thought was, can the standardization process keep up with the change on the technology stack side? And what I think I talked about, what are the favorite programming languages for the day? Going from Java and C# and so on. And, Go, Rust, all these, scripting languages. So that's important for us in the standards area to be aware of what's happening on the technology side as well, so that we don't drift apart. We have to stay in alignment if we're going to meet, these goals of hitting the tipping point in whether it's 5 years or 10 years from now. So that was my thought process around that.
And part of the debate that we had at the panel, the authorization conversation panel, was, sort of policy as code or policy as data. And, there's maybe a little bit of an implicit battle going on around these different approaches. And so when policy as code exists, you're really dealing with the developer mindset, and you're dealing with folks who maybe aren't full stakeholders the way somebody who owns authorization, might wish them to be. And so that you definitely want to incorporate them as a kind of persona in what you design.
Interesting. And that debate was really interesting, and definitely everybody had strong opinions, but we're all it was a valuable conversation. But my thought was, does focusing on that debate, and I also go back to the debate about, XACML versus OPA versus alpha versus, and what do we call this all? How does that advance the market, or does that kind of create a bit of chaos and make it harder for people to understand what the desired outcome it is? What are we selling as an outcome? Is the how to do it kind of getting in the way of the why?
So I think Auth0 is going to help, because Auth0 is going to say, no matter how you do it, this is the interface that you want to use to consume authorization. And that's a really good thing. And actually, if you compare that to OAuth, it's the exact same thing. OAuth said, this is how you do the authentication dance or the access delegation dance. But the way you store users and passwords and whatever you may need behind the scenes is all up to you. So Auth0 is achieving that. It is true that arguing about Rego versus Alpha versus Cedar versus Graph or whatever, that's not going to help the developer. I think we have to realize that some developers and some app frameworks might be better suited to Graph. Right. If you're a Neo4j person, then maybe you want to go down the path of Graph because it makes sense. If you're a Java developer and you happen to have an open source Java PDP lying around, as there are many, then maybe that works for you, and you're going to be configuring it with Alpha. If you are, I forget what Cedar is written in, is it Rust or Rust? If you're a Rust person, then a Rust library might be a natural thing to go for, and that's okay. I think Auth0 makes it possible to say that's okay.
Well, we don't have to argue about the protocols here, right?
Yeah.
The plumbing per se.
Yep.
And different vendors can address different business requirements with those technology angles that they support. And you can make those debates at that level, which is appropriate. But the basic plumbing and Lego blocks underneath, that's what will help the developer community. If I as a developer need to ask some service, can Alice do this? Can Bob do that? I have one way to write that in my code, or whatever programming language I use. And then on the back end, the DSO or the infrastructure team can configure that to connect with whatever PDP that organization chooses to purchase and deploy.
Yep.
So from the developer perspective, hey, it's great. I have one way to write a question of asking for, permit deny questions, search questions, and other things all that is going to work on. And I know what the response is going to be. So I can be confident in that contract, as a developer. I think that's really the real objective here. And then we can still have those other debates. Those won't go away. What language is better than the other, and so on. Great. There's not one size fits all there. But if we can, make a commodity for some of these basic functions, that's our goal.
Yeah, I could agree more. And the PEP PDP protocol, at the end of the day, it should be unarguable. It should be as simple as possible and just work. The fact that you do it through an OPA request or an alpha request or whatever, it didn't bring any value, right? So now that it's all standardized as one Auth-Zen, one end of conversation, and let people focus on the policy management or the access reviews or all the other features that you may want to worry about, not the plumbing, not the connection.
That's the highest value of standardization is strategic commoditization of something that is not a business differentiator. Like get on to the part that really makes a difference for your customers.
Yes.
Exactly. That's an excellent point. And it leads very well to the next question, which is, we've seen such growth in the last year from Identiverse 23 to Identiverse 24. What has to happen next? If you're looking ahead to Identiverse 2025, what ideally has to happen between now and next year to advance authorization?
I think there's a few different answers. Sort of, first of all, is what we are going to do within Auth-Zen, and that's continuing to work on the API, getting the first draft officially out and standardized, expanding into batch requests. So not just sending a yes/no question, but sending a multi-yes/no question. They're working on the search API, which I think is not going to be easy, by the way. Side note. That's one set of work that we need to do. The other part of work that we need to do within Auth-Zen is education. So going back to your developer question, developers need to know that externalized authorization even exists. And I think there's a bit of a gap here. And then the last thing is getting other software vendors on board. And what I mean by that is today, if you look at the 12 implementations or 14 implementations that we have, they're all authorization vendors or authorization frameworks. Now we need to move on to maybe IDPs or maybe API gateways, or maybe, the ideal goal would be to get a bunch of non-authorization, non-identity SaaS, such as Workday and Salesforce and, Expensify, you name it, on board with Auth-Zen. That's a way taller order, especially for short people like me.
Yeah. And I think also it feels like there's a lot of momentum building right now. You look at how many people wanted to get into your session the other day. It was incredible to see that. And so the word is getting out, and then we'll have the Auth-Zen readout this afternoon. Mm-hmm. It will be interesting to see how many folks show up there as well. So I think the word is getting out to this audience, but where do we go to meet the developers? Do we go to a CNCF KubeCon? Or do we go to other kinds of venues? Because we need to reach that audience as well. So that's something we should, I believe, all think about. But there's an amount of momentum that's been generated, so we need to follow through on that. And then I think one way to do that is what you said, David. Get this initial interoperability spec to an implementer's draft and standardize, and then the follow-on work that you described. So we're not just addressing the, basic, simple building block, but getting on to the other use cases and just keep moving forward. I think by this time next year at the next Identiverse, we will have a much richer set of APIs defined, hopefully more implementers as well, and just, keep marching on.
Yep. And then if you're working on design patterns too.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of work going on around, sort of the key use cases and patterns that that come from partly the OAuth world and partly the other, worlds of authorization where we've seen some success, but not necessarily standardization. And I think it's going to be really important to capture kind of the right problems. As I'm fond of saying, code is really important. Code is not actually king. Solving the right problem is king. And that's where I think it's going to be especially important to get to that, solving the sort of batch yes/no queries. That's going to be a syntactic sort of nightmare. We'll have to sort that out in the group. But solving the search question where you're not just getting a yes/no answer, you're getting more complex answers. That's a level that's going to add a lot of value if we get it right.
Yeah.
And by the way, I just need to make a plug for something that David and I are both actively involved in, which is the authorized community, which sort of sits aside Auth-Zen. Several of us here at this table are involved. Yep. And the reason I mention it is just because the authorized community, which was started by Sarah Cicchetti, it was started as a way to figure out how to have an authorization conference. And so that would sort of help find the community, and that table is where we can further discuss all the different stakeholders. It also publishes a newsletter on Substack, so authz.substack.com, for which David and I are both rotating editors.
I was actually wondering who's on the docket for next Monday.
I don't know. It's not either of us. At least I hope.
The childhood rules of not yet still apply.
Not it.
So, for the fellow authorized community people listening, not yet. So balls in your court.
Okay.
Exactly. But, it's very interesting. Within that community, still the themes that we're talking about right now still resonate. How do you align the business value of authorization with what you need to do to bring the developer community along as well? And how do you serve both parts? What needs to happen? What would a conference look like? What would people want to get out of that? And they're all really those fuzzy questions that are incredibly difficult to answer because there are so many moving pieces, and authorization plays a role in so many places. So I'm going to ask people to put their pessimistic hats on for a second. We normally don't do that. We're a very optimistic show. We know what we want to have happen in the next year, but realistically, based on market conditions and whatever else is going on, what do you think at the baseline will actually happen between Identiverse 2024 and 2025?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the implementer's draft of the interoperability spec that we saw in action this week, that'll be published. I don't see any impediment to that. And I'm not up to date on the exact standardization process after that, that OpenID Foundation follows, but certainly that's an easy enough win to forecast. Since we're in Vegas, what are the betting odds on some of these things? Maybe we ought to assign the betting odds on some of these things. As far as the other work that even David mentioned, I think the work on that, while difficult, and there will be lots of debates going on, but on the search API and other aspects, there's already been a lot of healthy debate about that. But I'm optimistic that the team, in AuthZen, the wider community is really behind this, and we'll get things sorted out. So I think we'll have other interoperability drafts for sure, potentially other implementer drafts by this time next year. Given how fast we've moved already, if you think about, the conversation about authorization standardization started at Identiverse in 2022, sort of fizzled out quickly. But last year, we got a slightly larger group together and picked up, and, we have the AuthZen working group accepted as a OpenID Foundation working group by October. Now, by June, or at the end of May, we have, an interoperability spec. So, this group is moving fast. So even though I'm typically skeptical or realist, I try not to be a pessimist, but I think we can accomplish a lot in a year.
I think we need to look at who the quote relying parties are that are coming to the table. That tells you everything because they're the hardest constituency to satisfy. Mm-hmm. And if we can do our jobs right, then we can attract those folks and have real examples of value being provided to getting an answer from a shared service.
I agree. I think that's the biggest hurdle is going out to those relying parties. Either like I was saying, the API gateways, that these are the easier ones, but also the harder ones, the actual applications being developed, and telling those folks, use AuthZen. No matter your poison behind the scenes, use AuthZen as a means to carry authorization information.
And just as a reminder, watching OpenID Connect go through the process of going to the RPs and asking them, did we hit the sweet spot? And then taking another 2 years till 2014 to actually ratify OpenID Connect. Mm-hmm. But they did a good job at that. And that's something, Mike Jones is really good at that. Maybe we should be talking to Mike about his tips and tricks.
I think we should.
Well, I think those are the questions that I had. This has been an incredible conversation. So thank you, all of you, for investing the time in a busy week. Great episode for many reasons, including that David has not made a pun in the entire time we've been talking. And I think that's the first time we've had that happen. So
we better stop now.
Right to go.
Yeah, I'm counting fate here.
One more thing. It's not a pun. It is not a pun. I want to express my gratitude for Mike Les, who's been amazing at the OpenID Foundation, supporting us in every way since last June, but even this week, lending us the room to do some work. So, Mike, if you're listening to this, which you should be, thank you.
Excellent. Yes. And so if folks want to learn more about AuthZen and the work that the AuthZen working group is doing, where should they be going? So
the address is openid.net/wg/authzen, and that's spelled AUTHZEN or ZEN for those of you in Canada. There's the pun. Yes, I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Excellent. Gerry, Eve, anything else you want to mention? Any other projects you want to share with our audience before we wrap?
I've got a question for Gerry.
Oh, there we go.
What about IDQL? How does that fit into that?
Well, IDQL is a vendor neutral format for defining access policies. And for the interop implementation, we used IDQL to represent the rules for the to-do application. Mm-hmm. And then for the runtime, we used our Hexa open source Hexa open source plugin for OPA to be the PDP. So that was our part in this initial stage of the AuthZen work. I think it'll be more important when we get to the profile for how a policy administration point sends its policy to a PDP. Mm-hmm. In our case, we're going to highlight how Hexa can now convert that IDQL into other formats. Mm-hmm. So that's where IDQL and Hexa fit in. But thank you for asking.
And IDQL is CNCF.
Yeah. So this is a CNCF sandbox project. Mm-hmm. So it's called Hexa Policy Orchestration over there. So if you're looking for that, there's info there, and there's links to our GitHub repos where we've got all that code.
Cool.
All open source. Great stuff.
Fantastic. Great question, David. That we were remiss in not addressing that earlier. So thank you for that. Eve, if people want to find out more about the great work you're doing with the Venn Factory, where should they go?
Well, thank you. Yeah. VennFactory.com. VNN, like the Venn diagrams that everybody loves in this industry.
That's so appropriate. Your consultancy is called that. That's awesome.
That is. Well, thank you again, both of you, for your time, and David for your time as well. Deeply appreciated. And we'll include some great links below this episode for folks who want to learn more. But until next time, we wish you well, and be sure to check out that Authorized Substack newsletter as well.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Dynamically Speaking. Stay tuned for our next one, and in the meantime, check the show notes and connect with us on LinkedIn and YouTube. And visit us at axiomatics.com to learn more about our authorization solution.